Test. Test. because C# is run through virtual machine.
Right.
I thought there was like some way to skip that.
Well, I mean, it uses a jitter, like it does that, but like no, it is not designed to do that. That's what they had problems with because
All right, ladies and gentlemen, for all of us that are here tonight in Captain America room, I believe our stream is about to start, if it hasn't already. But thanks, everyone, for coming here. And my name is John Henderson, and I am the gloomy dark of winter, which everyone had to brave just to get through here. It gets really dark after daylight savings time. I'm sorry about that. Also, sorry about having to reschedule this on a Monday night. There will probably be still some people coming through the door, but I don't know. And we did put the chairs out for you, but you're not obligated to sit in any of them. Just don't block anyone's view if you can avoid it. We do have a great show tonight, our final show of 2022. And thanks everyone at Capital Factory for hooking us up one more time. We'll be introducing our speaker in just a minute. But how many people went and saw the Games Awards? Yeah. What about that 15-year-old shit poster that went up on stage and invaded on the Elden Ring team? I guess that's a thing. You have invaders on Elden Ring. Yeah, they weren't really sure whether that was supposed to happen or not, but immediately someone modded in Bill Clinton into the game. So he has a cudgel of justice or something like that. He's not very strong. But 2 games made in Austin were announced here, or at least one co-development at the Airship Syndicate Wayfinder that they're doing with Digital Extremes. And actually beta testing just started this week, so people want to get in on that. Free-to-play MMO in development. And also Remnant 2 at Gunfire Games. So we got 2 different diaspora vigil from the THQ bankruptcy way back in 2013. You know, games keep getting made in Austin, so the fact that a couple of them actually got announced on a big prominent showcase, we're always helpful for that. Even if it's mostly just watching the trailers for new games that are coming out, that's all right. And if anyone wonders why I'm looking this way, that's where all the people are. You can't really see from the webcam if anyone's watching on. I'll check in a minute if anyone wants to look on our YouTube channel. It's not our YouTube channel, it's the Austin Tech Live Capital Factory. But we are filming this tonight for future usage. We have a good relationship with ATX Game Makers, and we do have the one from 2 months ago. Yeah, it was October. Seems like forever ago. October, AJ Smith's speech is being edited, and that will be available, and I'll let everyone know on the meetup page. But since we're all here, and since I'm here to waste your time, is anyone looking for a job? Please put your name up, give your name and what you do, and be prepared for judgment. Anyone looking for a job? All right. Come out in the light, because you're... Okay, come over here. Yeah, let's make that a rule. Come here. I'll hand you the mic, but you got to stand in front of the webcam. Excellent.
Awesome. Is this thing on? Okay. Hi, I'm Connor. I am a solo developer currently looking for his first position in the industry. And I'm relatively new to Austin, so I'd love to get to know anybody here. Feel free to come say hi.
Who's next? Excellent. You're certainly welcome to. And expanding the humanity of people who are game developers.
My name is Edgar Grasouris, and I am a sound designer, and I am looking to network into the gaming industry. And that's a goal of mine, and I've got a background in development. My background's in children's software development, sound design, as well as adult military training applications in VR, AR. Sound effects, voiceover, and music production. Thanks. I'd love to get to meet you guys.
Edgar, do you know about Aaron Brown's Austin audio meetup, game audio meetup?
I gotta get in on that.
Okay. Colin can help you, because he's on that. Yeah. Colin's a piano tuner and a Berkeley grad. And you actually had someone ask you to come and tune up their home piano. You got an appointment for that? Okay. Excellent. Well, you got a lot to confirm about. But I did your video on Instagram about tuning the pianos at the Paramount. That was actually cool. Yeah, I bet. How often do you get to tune grand pianos that are going to be for a big concert? There you go. Excellent. All right, anyone else looking for a job right now? I know we only got about a dozen people right now, but that's okay. How about people who are looking to hire? Come on up, Dan. Dan Dunham, anyone?
Hi there, my name's Dan. I'm an engineer, and I'm currently at Skydance Interactive, and I just want to let you know that they're hiring like all positions right now, and at the moment they're fully remote. So go ahead and check that out, Skydance Interactive. Take a look. There might be something interesting there for you.
Fully remote, but a lot of people coming out of Austin, and they may consider opening an office of sorts, but that's their choice to make. But that's another of a long list of companies that have designs of opening an office here in Austin. They are either already in the works or it'll be very soon after the start of the new year. So lots to look forward to. But how about our real speaker? How about I introduce him? Yes. We've actually had him once this year. He is a journeyman programmer who works full-time in Zynga, but also holds down his own brand, Sword Point Studios. Please welcome Alan Utoff.
Thanks, John. Are we all streaming live?
We should.
Okay, you want to check the stream quick?
I'll do.
All right, we're going to check the stream real quick to make sure we're going to do this. Always.
I don't know who could be watching.
You never know.
VGMU, working with open source licenses in Yearsville.
Cool. Awesome. Great. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. All right. So many think open source licenses are overcomplicated and only lawyers understand them. But you got to remember the engineers are the ones who wrote these for engineers. And if we look at them in that context, they become much easier to integrate into our code. So I'm Alan Utoff. I've been in the game industry for more than 14 years. I've worked with open source licenses and libraries for at least that long. I've worked on AAA games. I've worked for independent studios. I've worked QA, production, DevOps, IT, development, lead development, all these jobs. I do have 2 open source libraries of myself, the Epe Engine and FreeStick. I do work at a large game studio. I own my own studio who makes game tools and currently fencing score boxes and fencing stuff. And like I said, I've worked with open source licenses my entire development career. So quick disclaimer, I am obviously not a lawyer. So you can't take necessarily this as legal advice, but we're going to look at this from an engineering standpoint, not a necessarily lawyer legal aspect. But if you ever do go to a lawyer and ask him about open source licenses, they'll tell you it depends. Some of these licenses are very unclear on what you owe the author. There are some that ask for beer, a case of beer, and the lawyer doesn't know how he's supposed to get that case of beer to the author. So that's not helpful to us as engineers. And also the opposite, where you have companies flip so hard that they say no open source licenses because we don't know what that's going to do to us. That's also not helpful as an engineer when you need to take one of these licenses and apply it with the library into your game or application. So we're going to go through and talk about what an open source license is, kind of a brief history, and I mean brief, about where they came from, where the movement came from. We'll talk about some common licenses that you'll run into most of the time. What does it mean to comply with these licenses from at least an engineering standpoint? And what does it mean per platform? Because some of these licenses differently on the complexity of how you comply with them on different platforms, mobile versus desktop, etc. And then we'll have some time for some Q&A. So why do we use open source licenses? Well, we use open source licenses in our daily lives. For example, the web browser you use has many open source technologies. WebKit, V8, the web servers that run the internet, like Node.js, Android, completely open source. Even Apple and Microsoft produce open source technologies that we use every day. So when companies use them, we're trying to speed up development. Trying to take the next big thing and leverage the polished wheels that have come before them. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. However, with this speed comes some inherent risks. Security in the code may not be up to our company's standards. It could expose us to lawsuits and damages of the intellectual property of the company. And while lawyers are really good at understanding the legal verbiage of these licenses, it's the engineers who really are the best suited to weigh these risks and to picking the open source licenses. Remember, engineers are who drove this movement, not lawyers. So let's talk briefly about the security risks of these libraries. So when you evaluate the libraries for security, take some of the following steps. Look up reviews on the library, like places on Reddit. When OpenSSL had security issues, that was all over Reddit and various news organizations. Check security news sites. They'll usually post these warnings in their posts. Look at the coding standards for submissions. A lot of these libraries will have standards for what you need to do to be able to submit code to the library. And then finally, just look at the open source code. It's there to look for it. You see how they wrote it. So what does it mean for a license to be open source? The idea of an open source license is a legal framework that promotes sharing code without taking advantage of that goodwill. It also allows the author to dictate how they want the code to be used in a broader world. And there's two main types of open source licenses we're going to talk about: permissive license and copyleft. So what is a permissive license? It allows sharing of code with a very few restrictions, and most of these licenses are what I call as-is licenses, and they tend to be much more friendly towards commercial products. So copyleft, again, is an idea for promoting sharing of the code with a greater restriction on how and where the code can be used. And this idea came out of the mid-'80s from the GNU project, that is how you pronounce it, GNU, that Richard Stallman founded. And while these licenses initially were pretty hostile to commercial applications, a kind of a push has come to have a framework to help support commercial products with a copyleft license. Okay, so the history. So we're going to talk this in very brief. This history is very tangled, completely in forum posts, and we could have 4 talks about this. So the history of open source license is going to be just a snapshot that you're going to see here from the tangled web on the web. So before the 1970s, computer programs weren't really copyrightable and were freely shared amongst programmers. Part was learning how to be a better programmer, to share advancements in technologies and algorithms. Unix, a computer operating system, which was popular at the time, was freely distributed from AT&T. However, as software became more commercial, like more of a commercial commodity, the US government in 1974 updated the copyright law to make software computer programs copyrightable. And this led the push of Unix and other software to become proprietary and commercialized at that point. So in response to this, Richard Stallman formed a group to work on replacing many of the utilities like ls, copy, all these utility functions that Unix uses, their little programs. And he pioneered the idea in the mid-'80s that software could be a community and shared openly. You could build it in a group of people. You didn't have to be one big corporation. And in this tinkering spirit, he formed the GNU project, which stands for GNU stands for not, basically GNU is not Linux. Horrible acronym, but yeah, that's what it is. GNU is not Linux. And later that formed into the Free Software Foundation with the following tenets. Run the program as you wish for any purpose, modify the program to suit your needs, and have the freedom to redistribute the copies, distribute modified versions of the program so that community can benefit from your improvements. And as the decades, the 80s came into the 90s, new use cases and loopholes in existing licenses caused various new licenses to be written. So the push in this, in the early 90s with Linus Torvalds' release of Linux, the initial concept of the GNU project was realized. They finally had all the programs written in open source, ls, copy, all that, and they finally had a kernel that was open source as well, that matched the GNU project's ideas. Then during the late 90s, because corporations looked at this to see where it made sense in their portfolios, the Netscape Communication Corporation looked to open source the Netscape Navigator web browser, which probably very few people remember this. Some of you guys remember the browser. And it was one of the first commercial products being made open source. It was released under the Netscape public license, and this code later became, this license became the basis or the Netscape Navigator's open source code later became Mozilla's Firefox browser, which was then released under the Mozilla public license. All right, so now that we know where these licenses came from, let's take a deeper look at some of the common licenses that you'll run across these days. So I'm going to display some of them up here. Some of them are really long, so I've just shown the snippets that are relevant to engineering, but we'll go over it. So there are a lot of open source licenses out there, so we're just going to talk about a few. But you'll start seeing that a lot of them kind of share ideas off each other, and they look very similar. And so as you start looking at these, you'll see snippets of legalese that you'll be able to quickly identify and go, oh, that is how I comply with it. So the first one we're going to look at here is the MIT. This is the full license of the MIT. This license started in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. That's why it's called MIT. And it's one of the simplest permissive licenses to understand. So I'm not going to read the whole thing out here, but you can see the top part talks about, legalese, what the terms mean, right? And basically you can do, what you want with it. And the bottom talks about the warranty of it. And so basically this license says as long as you retain the copyright notice, you can distribute the code however you see fit. It also states that you can't come back and sue the authors for any damages the software does to you, your company, or whatever you're trying to do with it. It comes as is. So the next more complicated permissive license is the Berkeley Software Distribution License, or BSD. This comes in a couple of flavors, and it's also called the Free BSD, the Simplified BSD, the 2-clause. It's got a bunch of different names. As you notice, it looks very similar to MIT. The whole bottom part is probably verbatim MIT. And this is the 2-clause, and this is the 3-clause. And it states you can use the software however you wish as long as you keep the copyright notice in the source code and distribute a copy of the license with your software that uses that code. The 3rd clause adds the case that you can't use the names of the source code authors or the copyright holders to endorse your product. So if you get some famous license written by somebody, you can't be like, my product's awesome because I use blank's code. That is a violation of the license. And again, they have an as-is license where you can't hold them responsible for whatever the code does with it. So the next one up here is Apache. This is only a subset of the license. This is the part that talks about what you can do with the code. All the stuff above talks about, terminology and such. And this came out of the Apache server project. And again, this one says you can use the code however you wish with some additional requirements. You now have to mark the changes of your source code, the code you changed in the Apache license one. So if you have to change functions, do something, or some other part in the library that's under Apache, you have to mark it clearly that you changed the code. You have to add attribution, which says that you used a library that is under the Apache license in your application. And again, you can't use the names of the authors and the copyright holders to promote your product. It also gives a license to all patents that may be associated with the code, so you don't have to worry about getting a license for those patents. All right, so this is the general purpose license. This is the GPL. It's one of the oldest licenses out there. It was part of the GNU project when it was founded. Again, this is not the whole license. This is a very long license to read through. But this is the important part. If you were going to look at this license as an engineer and what to do with it, this is the part you're looking for. One of the biggest tenets of this license is that any code that you use, basically you link to the library or however you use, any way you use that code, the code that links to it must be released also publicly. And some people call that a poison pill. But also any modifications you make to the source code as well must be released to the public. So anything doing with the source code, linking, modifying, all has to be released publicly. With the source code release, you may not obfuscate the code. It must be in the same format as that you created it. It also provides that you have to give attribution to your product that you use a code that's covered by the GPL. The new version, version 3, does a few things. It shields the end user from DMCA type violations for circumventing DRM technology. It basically excludes itself as a technology under the DMCA laws. It also forces a license on all patents related to the GPL code to the end user. That means if your code is linked to it and now you have to release your code, now all your patents go along with that code as well. So this is the lesser general purpose license, or the LGPL, and it's the friendlier version of the GPL. And it builds on the GPL but changes a few things. So as long as the end user can update code that is covered by the LGPL independent of your code, you do not have to release your source code. And this is usually by having the LGPL code in some type of dynamic library that the user can then update later. It also does not shield the end user from DMCA violations regarding circumventing copyright. And you still must release any modifications that you do to the code under the LGPL. And then finally, you still have to say that if you use it, that your application uses LGPL code in the license. So let's talk about patents real quick. So not all open source licenses grant you the license to the patents that are associated with the code. If an open source license runs afoul of a patent, then your application that uses the code may not be shielded from a lawsuit. So let's look at a special case library that uses copyleft open source licenses. So for those who don't know, this is FFmpeg. It's a video codecs library for playing movies and is released under the GPL or LGPL. You get a choice. However, the library has some additional caveats. It has a few reverse engineered movie and audio formats, some of which do have patents associated with them. And reverse engineering codexes that are patented is still a very gray area in law. However, I have worked with this library. I've used it at many companies. I use it, and I've never run afoul legally of using this license. So what does complying mean as an engineer with these licenses? So for permissive as-is licenses, you may need to acknowledge that your program uses those licenses, and you're under no obligation, obviously, to release your source code. You can keep your source code close to your vest. For copyleft licenses, you must release any modifications to the license source code that is covered by the copyleft license. You can't block running the modified code either. And your user needs to be able to update the license code independent of your code. And finally, if you're the GPL, if you're using the GPL license, your code must be released along with it. So let's talk about the complexities on different platforms. So on the desktop, the permissive license may require you to again add legal nodes to your application. For licenses like the LGPL, you're going to want to link the code dynamically using DLLs, SOs, whatever your platform supports for dynamic linking, to allow easily changing of that LGP code after the fact. When working the GPL code, the best way to do it is to take the GPL, precompile it in an executable so it's completely separate from your code. And you also need to make sure that whatever you're calling from it, so basically you spawn a process and call that GPL binary, you need to also make sure that if that GPL binary is missing, that your application still functions and that feature is disabled. Otherwise, that runs afoul of the copyleft license. And basically, they consider it your derived work at that point because you can't function without that binary. On some platforms, updating the DLLs inside the app will break code signing, which can cause the app not to load. If there's no way to launch the app after the DLLs are updated, that violates the copyleft license. Okay, on to mobile. So again, permissive license, you stick the legal notice in, you're pretty much good to go. For LGPL code, you'll need to, again, dynamically link the code. In addition, you'll need to ensure that the user can sideload your app outside the App Store. On Android, this means providing the APK or whatever Android moves to so that the end user can update the LGPL libraries, dynamic linking ones, and then sideload the app onto their phone. On iOS, you'll need to provide an Xcode project where the end user can relink your app with the modified LGPL libraries they provide, and then upload that to their phone. Apple now gives the ability for everyone to have a free developer license that no longer becomes a restriction. You just need to provide the Xcode project. And on mobile, there's no way to release a proprietary app with GPL code. It will violate the copyleft license. There's no way to execute a precompiled binary. You're going to end up having to release your source code with it if you use the GPL. All right, for the web. So copyleft licenses in the front end, there's no way to be in compliant because most people obfuscate their JavaScript code, and that's a violation of the copyleft license if you provide, even for monkey patching, if you provide the obfuscated GPL or LGPL code, you're still obfuscating your original code, which is a violation of the copyleft. On the back end, there's no real issue because you're not really releasing that code to the end user. You're releasing it to people in the business who all have access to the source code. And since it's never, like I said, released to the public, you don't run afoul of that. And the courts have already established that any output from a GPL copyleft application that license does not transfer to the output of that application. So if you have something that spits out JavaScript, HTML, those output files do not automatically gain the license that is associated with the binary. Console and embedded. Again, permissive license, you just put the notification. For console, since there's no way for the end user to relink against the copyleft libraries or update them, it violates all those licenses. For an embedded device, a computer with a dedicated purpose, like a drone, for example, the end user still needs a way of loading the new DLLs onto the device. So you need to provide some mechanism, whether it be an SD card for the copyleft DLLs, or like iOS, where you provide a project they can recompile and load it onto the embedded device. And finally, if they can update the copyleft code so that you're in compliance with that license, you cannot restrict them you cannot restrict them with DRM from running that code. TiVo made that happen. There's actually a term called TiVoization. The LGPL and GPL version 2 did not explicitly say this, and TiVo took advantage of this, and there was a huge issue in the open source movement about this. So version 3 explicitly states you cannot do this. You must allow them to run the modified code. You cannot restrict it with DRM. So here's my field guide for working with open source licenses. Make sure to evaluate the open source license from a security concern. Use permissive licenses when possible. Avoid the GPL license with commercial software. Use the LGPL when on desktop. Use caution when you use the LGPL on mobile and embedded. And with web, stick to permissive licenses. So here's my contact information, my company, SwordPoint Studios website, my company's Twitter and my Twitter. And there's again my LinkedIn and my company LinkedIn. So at that point, I'm willing to take questions.
So there are a couple of companies that have used GPL licenses in commercial software. Like Red Hat has done this, and typically the way they've monetized their stuff is by providing services more than the software. Like you can buy the software really quickly pay for it. But, when you do something like that, where do you, like, can you just put all your code up on some server somewhere that's publicly accessible and say, this is, okay, I've complied with all these licenses by providing all my stuff over here, even though when you ship your package, the package doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, so the question is, the Red Hat, if you didn't know, Red Hat provides all their stuff open source, and they actually have a commercial business, and you're right, they provide support for that, and that is actually in the licenses. When you read it, you may charge for services like compiling stuff for people, helping people. That's completely legal. So the Red Hat's doing that. It's called CentOS. All the Red Hat binaries and source code as they come out, basically what happens is they release all their source code, and the CentOS team goes and recompiles all their code, and that's how the CentOS project came into being. So yes, that's basically what you do. You are in good standing if you go on like GitHub and you dump all your source code up on GitHub, and if someone contacts you and says, hey, I want your source code, you just point them to it, yes. You have to give it reasonable, and some of them talk about you have to provide good steps for them to actually build the code, But yes, you put your source code up on a repo or like the modified LGPL code up on the repo, and if someone asks for it, you point them to that. Any questions online, John, or any questions?
I have a question. Have there been any reported cases of someone using GPL for a game project and not realizing it until it's too late?
I have worked for companies that have used it in the wrong way. They haven't been sued yet. I don't know if they will be, but I've seen violations of it, and I've seen companies use it the wrong way. Usually the people run afoul is FFmpeg. That's like the hardest one, because FFmpeg is such an intoxicating library to use because it solves so many problems, but most people don't realize how restrictive that license is. And if you go talk to them like, oh, I'll go talk to the owners, and maybe they'll give me a commercial license. There's so many owners of FFmpeg, they have stated publicly they'll never be able to change the license. There's just too many people to make that decision.
One more specific thing is, what about the idea of making the source code available for a game project that has any online component or has a client-server architecture? The great example is the difference between Infominer and Minecraft. The former was open source, and famously, lots of people figured out ways to hack it, whereas Minecraft is closed. And that seems to come up every so often as the idea of why you would want to have your entire game based on open source software, because most of the licenses require you to have at least most of the code available.
So the question is, what's the a lot of people make the argument that having it closed source increases security, basically. Yeah, and I would point at OpenSSL as a great counterexample to that, because OpenSSL is open source, and while it has had security in the past, it is like the bedrock foundation of all security on the web. I don't know of many things that don't use OpenSSL for that. I mean, Minecraft could be very easily hacked if someone was able to get access to the source code. And that just shows, sloppy security practices.
If somebody were to try to navigate these issues, like you said, oh, I'm not a lawyer, right? But what type of lawyer maybe, or like who would somebody go to if they really needed a hard, clear answer on, oh, am I following the rules right?
I mean, I would go to the author who is running it and say, here's what I'm doing for, goodwill. I mean, most of these people aren't, they're all engineers. Like if you go to FFmpeg and like go talk to the main group of people who's developing it, they're all engineers, right? And I've seen places on forums where someone will run afoul of it and be using the using the GPL version when they should be using the LGPL. And they just politely say, hey man, you're using the wrong version. Can you please update the binary? And the other open source project says, oh, I'm sorry, let me update it for you. And that's it. There's no legal, they don't come after you with lawyers. They don't beat you over the head with the stick. That's usually how it is. If you do want to have a lawyer, there are possibly some lawyers that work in this type of field. But again, a lot of the time, I work for a company who we brought in a lawyer, and all the lawyer said was, it depends, and I have no idea how I can protect you with these licenses.
Usually big corporations, that's the
Yeah, so you didn't hear in the back, they were talking about there's usually copyright lawyers who specialize in copyright to understand these laws.
I guess I've just never heard very many high-profile cases where open source licenses was the basis for very high-profile laws. It seems like most of this stuff, like you said, it's engineered to not create loopholes that lead to lawsuits. We want the software to use.
Yeah, the biggest one was TiVo. The most recent biggest one was TiVo. The open source, there wasn't any legal things they could do to TiVo, but there was really bad blood from that TiVo. And that's why the version 3. I mean, usually what happens is you get someone who's found a loophole, and then they come up with a new version. And a lot of these licenses are written for, it's under the GPL version 2 or greater. So then all they have to do is bring out version 3, and immediately the source code is now covered by version 3. That's kind of what's happened with the version 3 LPGL, is everything that had to get rid of the loophole is got that clause in it. So you won't find much libraries left that are only LGPL2 or GPL2. Everything's moved to 3. Yes, that's what happened to Netscape Navigator. So Netscape Navigator publicly released the Netscape Navigator license, and they said in the license that they could take ownership basically and do whatever they wanted to with the features that the community added to the web browser. And that ruffled a lot of feathers, and people were really mad about that and started to not basically just kind of ignore the project, and they had to go back and retroactively fix the license to remove that in it. Sometimes you'll see them switch over. Like if, again, someone takes advantage of the license, they'll switch the license over and make all the new features with the newer license, or they'll put this clause in there that it's newer, that or newer. So it does happen, and you just have to know what version you're using and be careful. Like you could be using version 1 of the library and it's MIT, and then actually the good one for this is not OpenSSL. What is the library? It's an audio library. They use it a bunch in the games. OpenAL, that's what it's called, OpenAL. OpenAL version 1 and 2 are open source. You can use them pretty much however you want. Version 3 is not, it's proprietary. And they stopped releasing newer open source versions. They may actually have some that are copy left. I haven't looked in a while. But that's one of the licenses you'll find. If you go to smaller game studios, you'll find a lot of people using version 2 of OpenAL because that is still under open source licenses, and you just take whatever bugs come with it. No one uses the later ones because they're all proprietary or under some really restrictive license. No questions online, John? Okay, that's fine. All right.
Well, I actually mentioned to the gentleman from Capital Factory, he should be coming up in the next 5 minutes. Everyone who parked in the garage will want to get a slip to validate your parking from him. So don't worry about that. We won't make you pay $40 to leave. But do have one more announcement that I first have to apologize to Richard and to Alan, because we didn't tell you this, but this is not just the final show for VGMU for 2022. This is our final show. We are not going to be coming back to Capital Factory. If either myself or Gordon Walton are involved in a speaker show in the future, we're not sure right now. The truth is, the show has been faithfully every other month for the past 5 years since Gordon took it over, and he finagled me at midnight over Facebook Messenger to take over for him when he was going to leave the country. We've been doing this every other month, and that's about all we can have time to do because we both have lots of things going on. And the truth is, for both of us, we're a lot more busy than we had been in recent years. We managed to get all the way through the pandemic by doing things over Zoom, and we're very grateful for all the support that we've been given over the years, and this has been fun, but we kind of wanted to dial it down for a bit. Am I missing anything, Gordon? This is about it. Yeah. You got AV and streaming? Yeah, that's true too. Here's the thing, I did a whole talk about this back in June. Austin used to have a lot more stuff, opportunities for game developers to come together and not leave town. I think you're the one who said that you would like to see events that are more than just people going to Austin Bergstrom and meeting each other in the terminal on the way to GDC. And I like that a lot. That's pretty succinct, but I also think that game developers deserve opportunities to humanize themselves. I mean, to remind yourselves that you're actually people. You are, in fact, a set of skills and experiences that enable you to have a job and to make wonderful things that not everyone can do, but you're also humans. And that's an easy thing to forget when you're a cog in a large machine. But that also includes being able to talk about what it is you do in meaningful terms, plain English as much as possible, to various levels of experience. And we've managed to do that. We have all kinds of people who are doing lots of different things or different levels of their career. People right out of college or have been around for decades. Doing beer night. Did the last one of 2022, but we'll be back in January at Brutorium. There is Games Y'all, which is a product of the Museum of Human Achievement, and the last one of those for 2022 was last weekend. And they're doing a monthly show. They've already got one scheduled. You have to go all the way out to Del Valle to do it, but sometimes they come a little. Actually, no, the next one is going to be at Batch Kolaches out on Manor Road, so that's a little bit further north. And what? I don't know. He has the Discord channel. I have not heard anything about him. Global Game Jam is happening last weekend in January, and they're already wheels turning on that. That'll definitely be on Discord, and it may be in person as well on the UT campus, and maybe at least one other event space, at least to muster. This will be the first time in 3 years we've really been able to do that in person, but it might be time to do that again. I can't stress enough that the Game Club at UT Austin, EGADS, bar none, dollar for dollar, pound for pound, best source of new talent. Not everyone's looking for new talent, but it's there. Go get in on that. And they have dev events and they have speaker events, and this year, Austin Community College now has a game dev club, and they have speakers too. Friend Dev Busha from Alchemy Labs gave a whole great talk about the golden mean and how getting really curious about natural phenomenon really informs you as an artist when you're making stuff up. That's ATX Game Makers. Yeah, he has a website. And actually, if you go to atxgamemakers.com, there's the events page, which I update regularly. I'm not aware of anything else going on game-related for the rest of this calendar year. The other thing that would have happened in January would be PAX South in San Antonio, but as far as we know, that's not coming back. Reed Pop took a giant bath during the pandemic, and that one was cozy, but it didn't grow, so they're probably not going to be bringing that one back. And here's the best part, PAX East and GDC are they're overlapping this year. That's wonderful. So people are wanting to normally we just worry about GDC and South by Southwest, and we're kind of wondering if South by Southwest is going to bring back their Game Expo. They couldn't really get it done this year because really they had to do quite a bit just to get anything back, and they ended up doing, what was it called, the Creative Industry Expo. That was about all they could get done. Yes? As far as I know, the IGDA chapter is not active in Austin anymore. Yeah. Yeah, there are reasons. There are reasons it would be nice to have it again, but Gordon and I were both involved with it at different times, and we just kind of decided we wanted to do our own thing, and we could, so we did. But it would be nice to have some kind of framework. Right now, people coming into Austin, as they do all the time, either for work or to seek their fortune or go to school, and there's no one place to just point them. Closest thing is the events page on ATX Game Makers, and I do that all the time. But yes, we do that too, and I update that every weekend, and the Discord channel. So they're little bits and pieces. Yeah. Well, here's the really absurd thing is that I'm the one doing this stuff. I mean, I'm doing it because it's fun, but here's what I think absolutely needs to happen, which I kind of tried to elucidate on that in June. There's no money in this, and we don't expect it to. No one paid, I mean, Gordon paid for beer and pizza. One hand for Gordon Walton for paying for beats and pizza, all this. We have been fed and watered on the way out. And also for one hand for Capital Factory for hosting us this many years. Again, we didn't have to pay for this. We did have to reschedule at the last minute to a Monday night, but we appreciate that we have this at all. We'll have to put the chairs away too. But like Gordon said, there's just not a lot of venues that are available very often. I am aware of a couple different projects that are probably at least 2 years out to make more creative spaces available. And it turns out that things like the Austin Film Society, yeah, they have Austin Studios and they have their own cinema, but just to have things like a casting call for film projects, there's just not enough space to do it. You know, even for the few projects that are originating here in Austin, just things like that. There are crying needs that cost a lot that are just not available for lots of different things. And meanwhile, there's quite a bit of an economy for people that do have money to spend on marketing get-togethers here, there, and everywhere. And not a lot of bars that will just let you show up on an off night. That's why both myself and Lonnie Rosales from Austin Digital Jobs and the American Genius, we're both at Brutorium because, yeah, you might have to go park on the other side of the street because of the climbing gym is open late, but you can actually go there and pay your tab and not start a fight. And you can just like basic fellowship. We don't really have a room with AV and a microphone to host a speaker, but it would be nice to. Here's the wonderful thing concept. Classic Rotary Club. You know what Rotary Club is? That's when businesses open their offices to other people around the community so they can have events, get together, drink, and meet each other. No such thing exists like that for game development, and for very good reasons. Not all good reasons, but reasons, And right now, the pandemic obviously put a kibosh on a lot of that stuff, and a lot of people don't want anyone in the building unless they can prove vaccination or mask up or whatever. So these are all barriers, and I don't have a solution for any one of them, and that's why I just have to apologize in even doing this. Oh, hey, Gunnar, we're about to finish the show. Sorry. A little bit short on this. And oh, by the way, this is our last show, so didn't let everyone know that either. Not even Alan knew. But I didn't want to let you know because you did a great job.
I'm honored to be the last speaker so far.
See, we're going off on a high note here. But
Can I speak to the Rotary thing real quick?
go ahead.
So many of you, Gore remembers this and John remembers this. So back in 2003-ish time frame, there used to be a Rotary Club where we'd have a floating game developer meetup, and these speaker events would actually be at different game studios, and they'd open up the auditorium. That's how I got to see the inside of Retro, which is an amazing studio, which hopefully is still there, midway before they closed. And like I said, you can have a game studio and do things correctly. I mean, I was just at the Unity office at another meetup, and they have meeting rooms set aside for the ability for these things to happen. So again, I would love for something like that to happen. I understand why studios are hesitant to do this, but it seems like this is something I would love if studios would help out with that.
And
There's some platforms in town around because there's Amazon, Facebook, Google. They all have offices here that wouldn't have proprietary stuff.
So I run a meetup at Amazon, and it is a pain. The security is ridiculous, even to rooms that have nothing to do with Amazon. Yeah, we were tempted to pull the plug just on the amount of security to go into that. Uni's was not too bad. That's actually where I might suggest I'll hook you up with some people there that might help out. But yeah, I mean, yeah, some of these places like Google and Amazon or Microsoft, right? Yeah, but they all have like ridiculous security things.
Microsoft has done meetups around here too. Usually around Microsoft events, but they have had game meetups.
Yeah, so the real challenge really is the legal challenge. So one of the even places like this are starting to require insurance. So there just isn't an opportunity for free stuff because the insurance alone is significant. So if the company is not a big company that already has, so they have insurance for their employees. They don't typically have insurance for random people walking in off the street to do events, right? They're not really an event venue. So years ago, we were able to get away with murder on all kinds of stuff. And we did go to all the studios in town that were big enough to host us, right? And yeah, the studio ownership there was, at that time, was a lot more local than it is now also, right? Most of the studios in town are owned by out-of-town people at this point. So it's a challenge, right? Because if you want to run a not only a nonprofit but a free thing, everything is stacked against you. If you have a membership club and charge membership, then you can get away with all kinds of stuff. But that money it doesn't go to the organizers; it goes to all the stuff it takes to organize it.
well, one thing that kind of ties everything, what you said, what Rob said, you want to know who has insurance? IGDA has insurance. Not that we had to use it. The only thing we ever really did was when we were hosting a booth at South by Southwest Gaming. they would actually demand it and we could actually arrange for it. And actually having someone in charge of it, that was the other thing. I never wanted to be in charge of the local chapter. I just wanted to do my own things and be enabled for that. But it also became a little difficult because, well, there were a whole lot of other people who wanted to do things. And unfortunately, the leadership at the time kind of had this habit of, hey, John, put this guy to work. Well, I don't know who that is. I have my own people. I mean, I'm trying to dial this down to as simple as possible so I can be responsible for all of it. If there's no money to be involved, then that's the way I want to do it. Anyway, like you said, that could be done and potentially, and actually some of the events you're talking about, those are all IGDA. IGDA had the event at Midway. I had Microtalks at the space up in Retro, and yeah, it's still there. And it's great that I've been able to do all this stuff because I wanted to. I wonder how many other people want to do it. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy.
Crazy. I mean, when I came here from the Bay Area, this was beautiful. I mean, it was great to see this again. Because in the Bay Area, there's, I don't know how many different IGA chapters, right? And none of them do
Well,
anything interesting.
one thing is very difficult with the IGDA chapter, and I've heard this specifically referred to as Dallas, and I don't want to pick on them, but the way I always heard IGDA Dallas meetups described is that all the people with jobs would be pressed up against one wall, and they wouldn't identify themselves as such, and all the other students would be over here, and if you got over there, you know, guy over with a job, he'd be like, I work at Gearbox, but don't talk to any of the guys from UT Dallas. But at the same time, that is a very real and understandable game dev fear, is the job have-nots. But again, how do you address that unless you let them in to some degree, socialize them somehow? And that's why I've never wanted to worry about that. I've never wanted, not to say that I've never had an event in Austin where there hasn't been some, you know, guy who was socialized on Reddit hitting up everyone, assuming that everyone has the same perspective as a hiring manager, and no one's around to tell them they're not. But those people, honestly, one person like that can screw up a whole party. But it's not that common. But the only way to make people believe that is to keep having events. So in the next year, you know, you're welcome to come to beer night. I will be announcing it probably in the later part of the month. Keep your eye out for Global Game Jam. That will happen last weekend. It's actually going to be a whole week, but you can decide what 48 hours to use. Yes, Asger?
I just want to know how we can get on your night list.
Okay, I will make sure you know. No problem. I do have, that's the other thing is that once upon a time, no one had a problem with Facebook, so we still are using it on there, but we've also extended everything that was on Twitter onto Mastodon. There's a wonderful little tool called MOA Party, MOA.party, and you can sign up for it, and it is open source and allegedly benign, and you can give your information and let people cross-post between Mastodon and Twitter. Which way, both ways or just one way. So I have that set up for the ATX Game Dev calendar. But people have to look at those things, and not everyone does. I mean, this is also the time when social media is so discombobulated, and paying attention to anything going on is an effort, which is, again, something that game developers don't have time for. Here's another thing I would like to see. People who are in positions of authority at game studios, which is basically like 3 guys here. Tell your people. Tell the people you work with. Tell the people who work for you. Tell them as many opportunities as you have about things that make Austin special to you. I know Dan had said, you know, there's a now Slack channel for Skydance Austin. Even though they don't have an office yet, he's telling people about the event. Good for you, Dan. But also, not everyone's going to do it. I have no authority to twist people's arms and make people do things outside. Everything of this is a distraction to game development. But you need it. Otherwise, you forget how important you are as a human being. At least that's what I think. That may not be important to everyone who's in game development. A lot of people get into game development to forget that they're actually humans, but you get reminded at some point. Okay? This world will remind us that we are in fact human. So we're here until 9 o'clock. Like I said, Erwin has our slips. Please sure get one of those. I think how many did you bring up? him. Thank you very much for coming up. Everyone's taking care of us tonight. And be safe on the roads when you go back, and good night.